artifacts lack intrinsic ends. That is to say, the artifact isn't for itself, it's always for something else. So I don't mean that they lack a proper end, right? There's a bed's for something, but the bed's not for the bed. The bed is for someone to sleep on. So the end comes from the artifact being made for a use and being used by something outside of it. So it's not self-grounding and self-organizing the way the natural substance is. So on that, the essence of a natural being is actively working on bringing itself to its end in the sense of its activity. So the form of frog, again, is not about the shape of the frog, it's about this activity of making it be frog-like and actualized as the frog. So this conception of nature joins the nature as the origin, what gets it going, the process of what's activating it, and the goal that it's trying to actualize that being of its natural self. Marking the difference by whether the cause is external or internal alone construes natural change as fundamentally the work of the efficient cause. The efficient cause joins the matter to form an artifice where the form of the efficient cause is distinct from that which is created. In natural generation, where the form of the efficient cause is akin to the form of the offspring, the efficient cause works less as an external shaper whose job is finished when the shape is achieved, and more like the organizing principle that characterizes the formal cause of the new being. I'll say more about that in the last section. In his extended case for what nature is in Physics 2:1, Aristotle defines a thing constituted by physis, nature, as that which, quote, has within itself a principle of motion and rest, end quote. Aristotle responds to those who think of nature in terms of, quote, that immediate constituent of it, which taken by itself is without arrangement. For example, the wood is the nature of the bed and the bronze the nature of the statue, end quote. Aristotle uses examples of material of artifice to explain his opponent's view, which leads to the interpretation that what is rejected here is the role of matter. But in what follows, Aristotle rejects the artifice view of what matter is. So he's talking about this view of pre-Socratic Antiphon. Antiphon argues that nature is matter, because if you plant a bed and it could reproduce, the wood would generate, not the shape of the bed. Like Aristotle, Antiphon defines nature in terms of that within it which has the power to generate. Antiphon takes the artifact in the form of the bed to be the model of nature. He views form as an incidental arrangement of material and misses the underlying insight of his analogy, which is that nature is what comes to be from within itself, rather than as a result of a form imposed on it by someone akin to the bedmaker. In the bed, the form or arrangement is incidentally unified with matter, such that if the bed were able to decompose, its form would disintegrate. Against privileging the efficient cause as the chief way to understand nature, Aristotle's critique of Antiphon illuminates the sense in which nature's tendency to move to generate is from an active work of form from within the substance. Form is not the shape of matter which the craftsperson arranges. The efficient cause of the natural substance has a form akin to what it generates. This form works on actualizing the natural being to do the work of organizing itself, since form's own work is to actualize a being in its proper activity or function. Aristotle concludes, quote, the form indeed is nature rather than the matter, for a thing is more properly said to be what it is when it exists in actuality than when it exists potentially, end quote. The reason the wood, not the bed, emerges is that the part of the bed that is natural, the wood, is what is capable of moving from within itself to fulfill itself, by contrast to the bed, whose form in the mind of the bedmaker is separate from the bed and not actively making the bed be a bed. The form of the bed does not work on making the bed be a bed the way that the form of the human works on making the human a human. This self-organizing work of form is the actualizing work that connects it to its end, and not simply the moving cause that sets it in motion. When Aristotle speaks of the coincidence of the formal, efficient, and final cause in natural beings in Physics 2:7, he does so, I maintain, because the moving cause becomes the work of the form to fulfill the natural substance in a way that is unique to natural substance. Natural substance's internal principle of self-organizing points to the unity of the natural substance that Aristotle affirms, by contrast to the materialists who come before him, who don't just reduce animals and plants to their material elements, but on some readings deny that more complex beings are substances at all. In my view, the focus on the efficient cause as the primary sense of nature does not achieve the unity on which Aristotle insists against these materialist views. What's importantly rejected in Antiphon's account is the view that form and matter are related as they are in artificial objects, where the form is incidentally united to the material, where both form and material are inert, and the efficient cause is the source of the unity. The focus on the efficient cause lends itself to a view of generation wherein a maker shapes matter, which is more conducive to a conception of prime matter, if that means material that has no relation to form. I follow the distinction between the conception of matter as some basic stuff, which is associated with Aristotle's predecessors, and Aristotle's innovation of matter as the metaphysical concept of a substratum. I suggest that the substratum concept of material includes a concept of matter as basic stuff, and this stuff has a specific character in every instance. Aristotle uses occasions of elemental change to describe the capacities of different material in terms of the material's own power. Having considered the possibility that all things come from the same primary things or have the same starting point, Aristotle examines how different materials have their own capacities, phlegm and bile, for example, in Metaphysics 8:4. Aristotle emphasizes the importance of the material being different for different purposes, and that this difference is not due to the work of form to make the material into some further organized being, but to some power of the elements. In making the cause of the unity of form and matter outside of and different from the entity's form and matter, the artifice model of nature struggles to show how they are unified. But if form itself is already integrated with matter, then it can work on matter through its material power. Natural form joins the efficient cause to the actualizing and organizing work of form, rather than just arranging matter in a way that remains external to the natural being. Insofar as functional form determines the natural substance and organizes it so that it can achieve its function, form is responsible for the function of the natural being. Insofar as the end and actuality of the natural substance is better, and what brings it into its end is superior than what is in the service of that end, form is normatively superior to matter. If, in elemental change, some powerful sense of material exists, even in the elemental forces of hot and dry and cold and wet, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a minute. So not just because Aristotle describes the figure of semen in material ways, so that's what's happening in generation, semen brings the form, but also because the natural account of generation requires it, then Aristotle's view of matter contributes to a sense of nature as an internal source of change, not merely as an internal efficient cause, but in the sense of the internalized organizing work that characterizes nature. So I might remind you that in Physics 3:3, Aristotle talks about how motion is in the movable, pointing to the way that the internal principle of nature is immaterial. This sense of nature finds form and matter profoundly unified, and this unity involves the work of matter beyond mere potential for form. This view of nature I offer here maintains that material makes a contribution that is not reducible to a role as potential, and that the particular work of form in natural generation depends on material. This view depends on a profound unity at the heart of nature by contrast to the incidental unity of artificial things. Okay, so this is my last section on generating substance. So from the normative hierarchy to interdependence. In this final section, I illustrate this co-reliance and commingling of form with matter by showing how the way semen comes to have power shows that it depends on matter. This aspect of Aristotle's biology has often been construed to signal not only Aristotle's association of form with male and matter with female, but also to exemplify the artifice model of nature wherein form is imposed on matter. In Generation of Animals, Aristotle differentiates between the male contribution, semen, quote, in and with which is emitted the principle of soul, end quote, and the female contribution, menses, which is the material, on the basis of levels of concoction. So concoction is a process of heating through what Aristotle calls vital or natural heat. He also calls it the heat of the soul, or living heat, or animal heat. Semen is distinguished from menses in semen's ability to internalize in another the capacity to internalize heat in another. The idea there being when it is successfully working as semen, it is able to produce another who can also produce semen. Menses, like semen, is concocted residue, but as blood, it depends for heat on what is external to it, while semen's heat is due to the internal heat of the animal. This heat becomes internalized in semen. Against the view that heat is the formal principle that is imposed on the material principle of moisture in menses, I argue that heat in semen is a material power, and as such, material is supporting and advancing the work of form. So I understand this is controversial. Let me try to make my case. My case that heat's work demonstrates the material contribution to form traces back to the role of heat as one of the elemental powers, which Aristotle describes as playing a role in elemental change, wherein one elemental power, either heat or dryness, moisture or coldness, remains the same while one changes. Okay, so if you have been following the handout, this idea is explained under matter in nature, under the fourth bullet. The second one there works out further how this works. So the way it says there, takes turns playing role of matter and form. What you have is a movement through the elements. Okay, so lots of people think that the elements are the source by which to say there has to be prime matter. How do you get elemental change? There has to be something that remains the same through that. These people don't read On Generation and Corruption, because there, Aristotle explains that change through these elemental forces. So in this shift, fire is hot and dry, and so when the hot remains the same, but the dry turns to wet, then you get air. And you cycle through the elements where in each change, one of the elemental forces remains the same, and so functions something like a substratum, and one changes in the way that form does. In this cycle, each elemental power can sometimes be the material through change, and sometimes be the form that marks the new element. Aristotle explains the specific work of heat in semen in terms of pneuma, or hot air, which he also uses to explain how foam, oil, lead ore, and snow act in his analysis of why semen acts as it does. He explains, and this is the quote under, well, it's the third to last bullet. It says, semen This is the passage. Other fluids thicken besides those which are composed of water and earthy matter, namely those composed of water and pneuma. Oil behaves in the same way. It thickens when it gets mixed with pneuma. Lead ore too, when it gets mixed with water and oil, increases its bulk. And whereas it was fluid and black, it becomes thick and coherent and white. The reason is that pneuma gets mixed in with it, this hot air. And this produces the increase of bulk and lets the whiteness show through, precisely as it does with foam and also with snow, because snow too is a foam. These reasons explain the behavior of semen as well. It is coherent and white when it comes forth from within because it contains a good deal of hot pneuma owing to the internal heat of the animal. The body of the semen acts as the vehicle for the principle of soul, and it dissolves and evaporates, so it's not detectable in the female or a part of the new being, just as the fig juice evaporates when it has curdled the milk. This is another image that Aristotle uses. So you may know that cheese was discovered accidentally when people stored milk in animal stomachs and then rode a long ways. So they would, they would ride, and while they were riding, the movement of the milk in the stomach that itself produced a kind of rennet, would harden the milk and turn it into cheese. So the rennet itself, this kind of animal enzyme, wasn't a part of the cheese, but it produced the effect that made the milk become the cheese along with the movement. Okay, so Aristotle's point is that semen does not contribute matter, and therefore semen cannot be a part in the set shape of the new being that's formed. That the material of the semen cannot be found in the fetation need not mean that semen does not work through its material, which seems to be the point of Aristotle's extended consideration of the composition of the body of the semen, which works through its material power on the menses, the way that fig juice or rennet curdles milk to make cheese. The curdling agent is not part of the final product, but it nonetheless works through its material power. Scholars defending a view of form as separate and distinct from material argue that the heat in semen is not matter, and that the pneuma, which holds vital or natural heat, is a spiritual rather than material principle, and even then, for some scholars, not the source of form. Even the extent to which material is at work in semen is, on this view, based on a more divine material substance like aether. Aether is the element that Aristotle argues in De Calo on the heavens comprises the heavenly bodies, which Aristotle thinks of as divine. It's true that Aristotle writes that the soul capacity of every kind involves some different body from the elements, which is more divine. And yet, Aristotle nonetheless proceeds to discuss the hot pneuma that he says is analogous to what is in the stars, yes, but nonetheless is also in very down-to-earth substances like oil and iron ore and snow. If this hot air material is divine, then these substances would also be divine insofar as pneuma seems to affect their characteristics. Scholars seem to insist on denying the materiality of vital heat because they view form as the contrary of matter. But Aristotle's account of generation points to the material capacities that enable semen to animate, and thus the male and female principles to join. Heat in the moisture that comprises semen is worked up to the point where it can heat the menses to the degree that it can internalize the heat and the ability to produce the heat. When that internalization occurs, the fetation has been formed. Animation seems to be the process of taking over the capacity to heat from within oneself, from the semen, which is the work of the heart and liver together. So when I talked about the efficient cause not as shaping, but as bringing forth this ability to be organizing, that's the sense that I think that the semen exemplifies. Aristotle sets up the discussion of semen's work in Generation of Animals 2-3 with a consideration of the nutritive, perceptive, and rational souls. He concludes that reason enters from outside at one point, which is why it alone is divine, even as he follows his account of how the souls differ with the claim that in all cases, the semen contains what enables it to do its work, which is pneuma. Okay, this is the last paragraph. In natural beings, the work of form comes from another with the same form. This other is an enmattered being which generates another like itself, who both takes on the continued work of self-organizing and who is itself capable of producing another with this capacity. The form of the parent substance shares an organizing power that enables the child to become independent natural substance. This power is shared through an enmattered figure which itself does the animating, heat-internalizing work through material power. A unity emerges between parent and child in the sense that nature begets nature, and it begets nature that itself is concerned to actualize and beget nature. This unity involves a reciprocal intimacy between form and matter that the model of artifice leaves separate. Matter does not merely depend on form in order for it to be manifested in the world. Form depends on material powers at the most basic level of natural generation in order for it to animate the new fetation. This account does not compromise the role of functional form or teleology in Aristotle, but shows how material is not to be subsidiary in the work of achieving function insofar as its powers enable the functioning of form in generation to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adriel, for this both pedagogically sensitive and also scholarly paper. So now I will give in Turkish the Turkish version of your abstract, and then I will give my short response paper, again in Turkish. You know the English version already, so
I'm going to look it up on my phone to remind myself.
Evet arkadaşlar, Adriel Trott'un sunumunun başlığı Aristoteles'in madde biçim öğretisinde ve üreme anlayışında normativiteyi yeniden düşünmek. Madde biçim öğretisi veya filomorfizm, Aristoteles'te doğal tözün, doğal varlığın, biçimsel ve maddi nedenlerden oluştuğu öğretisi. Biçim, doğal bir var olanı neyse o olmaya yönelik olarak organize eden güç veya kuvvettir. Madde ise o var olanın nelerden oluşarak varlığa geldiğidir. Aristoteles'in bu madde biçim öğretisine yönelik feminist eleştiri bu öğretide biçimin Aristoteles'te ayrıcalıklı olan işlev ve amaç kavramlarıyla bakar ve böylece maddenin biçime tabi kılınması nedeniyle bu öğretinin aslında normatif bir öğreti olduğu. Normatif demek değer taşıyan olması gerektiğini ifade eden bir öğreti olduğu. Nitekim hayvanların üremesi üzerine eserinde Aristoteles biçimle erili ve maddeyle dişili bağdaştırırken ataerkilliği meşrulaştıran bir metafizik ima eder. Bu şema ayrıca etkin ve edilgin toplumsal pozisyonlar arasında, yöneten ülkeler ile yönetilenler arasında, zihinle beden arasında çizilen kavramsal ayrımların sorumlusu olarak da gösterilmektedir. Tabii ki bu kavram çiftlerinde ilk terim eril'le, ikinci terim dişil olanla bağdaştırılmıştır. Ben ise, diyor Trott, madde biçim öğretisinin normatif bir öğreti olduğu görüşüne karşı çıkan bir doğa anlayışı savunuyor. Bu anlayışa göre doğa kendi içerisinde çalışarak kendi amacını yerine getirir. Dolayısıyla biçim Aristoteles'in hayvan üremesi çözümlemesinde örneklendirildiği gibi maddi öğesel güçlere dışarıdan dayatılmaz. Bu güçlerin içerisinde ve içerisinden işlerliğini sürdürür. Benim iddiama göre biçimin madde üzerinde tahakküm kurduğu zanaat odaklı doğa anlayışı Aristoteles'in madde biçim öğretisinin normatif olduğu görüşünün altında yatar ve hareket ettirici nedene öncelik tanır. Oysa benim savunduğum doğa anlayışında 4 neden de aynı önceliğe sahiptir. Ben daha kuşatıcı bir madde biçim öğretisi sunuyorum. Yani bu öğretide madde ve biçimden birisine öbürü karşısında öncelik vermek yerine biçimin kendi işini gerçekleştirirken maddeyle birlikte çalıştığı, karşılıklı bir bağımlılık ilişkisi sergileyen bir madde biçim öğretisi sunuyorum. Benim takipçisi olduğum görüşte doğal biçim her zaman maddelidir, söze içkindir ve sözün nedenidir. Ve en temelde öğesel güçler düzeyinde madde biçim tarafından belirlenmemiş, kendine göre özgül bir güce ve karaktere sahiptir. Bu anlayışa göre doğa, doğaya giden yoldur. Yani daha da çok doğal varlık üretme yetisini üretir. Zanaatten farklı olarak doğa, üretimin hem kaynağı hem süreci hem de amacıdır. Zanaat ürününde ise zanaatkar üründen ayrı ve farklıdır. Üretim süreci de son üründen ayrıdır. Kapsamlı bir şekilde incelediğim üzere doğayı anlamada hareket ettirici nedeni öncelikli sayan yaklaşıma karşı Aristoteles, fiziğin 2. kitabının 1. bölümünde Antifon'u eleştirirken, doğanın hareket içinde olduğunu ve biçimin de maddenin geçici şeklinden ziyade etkinlikte bulunduğunu gösterir. Bu son bölümde biçimle maddenin bu karşılıklı bağımlılık ve iç içerik ilişkisine örnek olarak meninin güç kazanma sürecinin nasıl da maddeye bağlı olduğunu gösteriyor. Aristoteles'in biyolojisinin bu yönü sık sık Aristoteles'in biçimle eril öğeyi ve maddeyle dişil öğeyi bağdaştırmasının bir göstergesi olarak sunulmuş. Ayrıca biçimin maddeye dayatıldığı zanaat odaklı bir doğa anlayışının örneği olarak kullanılmıştır. Hayvanların üremesi üzerine eserinde Aristoteles alıntı, ruh ilkesini taşıyan ve aktarılmasına aracılık eden eril katkı olan meni ile dişil katkı olan adet sıvısını tırnak içinde pişerek olgunlaşma düzeyinden hareketle ayrıştırır. Pişerek olgunlaşma özel bir ısınma sürecidir. Bu ısınma sürecini sağlayan şeye Aristoteles çeşitli isimler verir. Doğal sıcaklık, ruhsal sıcaklık, yaşamsal sıcaklık, hayvansal sıcaklık gibi. Meni, adet sıvısını meni üretecek şekilde harekete geçirir ve bunu da faydalı bir tortu olarak içerdiği sıcaklıkla gerçekleştirir. Bu sıcaklığın adet sıvısındaki maddi ilke olan nemin üzerine empoze edilen biçimsel ilke olduğu yönündeki görüş tersine ben adet sıvısının maddi bir güç olduğunu ve bu yönüyle biçimin işini maddenin ilerlettiğini iddia ediyor. Sıcaklığın gerçekleştirdiği çalışmanın maddenin biçime katkıda bulunduğunu gösterdiği yönündeki iddianın gerekçesi sıcaklık, soğukluk, kuruluk ve nem gibi öğesel güçlerden birinin değişirken bir diğerinin aynı kaldığı öğesel bir değişimde Aristoteles'in bir rol oynadığını söylediği bu güçlerden birinin sıcaklık olması. Sonuç olarak benim iddiama göre madde dünyada görünürlük kazanmak için biçime bağlı olsa bile biçim de yeni fitüse ruh ve can katmak için doğal üretmenin en temel düzeyinde maddi güçlere bağlıdır. Bu gerekçelendirme Aristoteles'te işlevsel biçimin veya teleolojinin rolünü tehlikeye atmamakta, sadece işlev görme çalışmasında maddenin tamamlayıcı bir rolün ötesine geçtiğini, barındırdığı güçlerle biçimin işlev görmesini sağladığını göstermektedir.